from the Raptors perspective, they absolutely demolished the Milwaukee Bucks last night. It was weird to see, to be honest with you, after the weekend that they had, losing to the Sixers, losing to the Blazers, losing to the Bulls. It was just, it was like, what is going on here?
Right.
They had an offensive explosion. They scored 130 points against the Bucks. I think, yes, there were some really positive signs from the Raptors side of things. Scottie Barnes is coming into his own more. He had a 20-point double-double in consecutive games for the first time in his career. He's averaging over 2 blocks a game. He's been dominant defensively. He's shooting the ball at an excellent clip. Maybe that doesn't stick around, but overall, that's a positive sign. I think the main takeaway here from that Raptors game, though, is just how bad the Bucks have looked to start this year.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't just apply to that Raptors game. I watched their game against the Hawks, and Lauren, man, like, they can't stop a nosebleed. Like, the defense has been very, very brutal.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the system. Maybe it's them trying to get used to new personnel, new coach, new coaching style. But it has not been good so far for the Bucks. It's been very, very shaky.
Yeah. I mean, with Milwaukee, real quick, before we kind of keep going with the Raptors.
Sure, yeah.
It's been a little, like what you said about like the coaching system, you obviously are going to expect changes, but to see them be so dominant last year and even years before then, they've always had a strong defensive identity. To see it shift to the degree that it has me like asking big time questions. Like, what do you, that I didn't expect that. Obviously, you with the players that went out, we don't need to revisit that. But
yeah,
I didn't expect it to look the way it has looked. And so, I mean, you kind of hope that those kinks get ironed out and everything works out. But and personally, I think they'll be fine. Let me preface by I do think that they will be fine, but I do think that it's been pretty concerning, and I don't know that I have a specific answer on what it is that they need to address in like the immediate, like right now, to get things changed. Do you have any thoughts on that real quick?
I think they have tried to play a very aggressive defensive style. It's pulling Brook Lopez out of the paint a little bit more. It's forcing Giannis to be more of an on-ball defender, and it's just not, you know, good for those guys' particular skill sets defensively to be in that position. I think ultimately Brook Lopez is a guy who has to play a conservative style of defense. He was really great in that. I mean, last year he was second in rookie defensive player of the year voting. He was phenomenal. And I think when you play, the thing is, in order to play a conservative style of defense, you need to have a perimeter defense that you can trust and rely on. And the Bucks perimeter defense just has been very, very bad. The Raptors, you know, they've been emphasizing paint touches and getting into the teeth of the defense. And they were doing it at will against the Bucks, at will. And that's just so surprising because that's been so unconventional for this Bucks team over the last 5 years. They've been one of the best interior defenses in the entire NBA for like 5 years in a row. And that just hasn't been the case so far. And again, I don't want to ring the alarm bells too much in the first 5 games of the season, but it does feel concerning that this team that, you know, like I said, hung its hat on the defensive side of the ball is now completely shifting into an identity of an offensive first team. And by the way, their offense doesn't look that great either. In the Hawks game, I believe they gave up 24 turnovers, and the team absolutely dominated them in transition. In the Raptors game, I can't remember how many turnovers they got, but my guy Samson Folk, he mentioned that the Raptors scored 3 times as many points in transition as the Bucks did.
That's crazy.
Which is just absolutely insane for the Bucks, which were used to be, again, one of the best transition teams in the NBA. So the Bucks feel like they're going through a little bit of an identity crisis. And that'll happen when you uproot your team, right? You're adding Damian Lillard, one of the best, you know, top 75 type player, into the mix here. How does that work with Giannis? How does that work with Brook Lopez? How does that work with Chris Middleton? You're adding another piece in there, and Adrian Griffin, who is a rookie head coach who's still trying to figure things out and, you know, adopt his own coaching style, maybe a little bit too much to a team that probably needs to play similar to how they have over the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my questions are more so like, when is this team going to level out? Because I feel like it's been on the opposite side of the spectrum of what people expect. I don't expect it to be this bad for the entire year. Like you said, I think it'll round itself out. But I'm concerned about the defense, to say the least.
Yeah, a little. It's like a little too. You have a reasonable expectation of like not growing pains, but like a transition period. But then when it seems like such a drastic change, or like that's when I'm kind of like But switching back to the Raptors, what Scottie Barnes has done to start the season is not getting talked about enough. And I mean, it's a big deal. And I think what the Raptors, I always come back to, okay, the Raptors looking forward, I actually like their group. And people have look at right now, and they're like, oh, the Raptors, they're going to be at the bottom, or they're going to have a rough year. But when I look at the Raptors, I'm like, okay, but look at these different pieces. And I think how they've started the season, looking at some of their individual guys, especially what Dennis Schroeder has stepped in and done. I mean, it's a fun group. And so obviously a lot to figure out in the long term. But I think right now, if you kind of pick apart the individual pieces and what they sort of have, I like them. I think that they're a fun team. I saw somebody tweet, I don't remember which account it was, but somebody was like, the vibes are good in Toronto again. Do you feel like that's accurate?
Yeah. So they have. No, it's funny you asked that, because they have this, they're bringing out the chain, because every team that's trying to reinstill the vibes nowadays, they will give you a chain at the end of the game. And they have a win the day chain, and Pascal Siakam wore the win the day chain for the first time.
That I saw.
So yes, the vibes do feel like they're back. I think ultimately look, I think my expectations for this team were low compared to general consensus. I thought they would be probably in and around the play-in, maybe just outside of the play-in. And maybe that is what they are. Maybe they achieve better than that just because of the leap that Scottie Barnes is taking. But I think for the most part, they've been at where I expected. They're a very good defensive team. They might be one of the best, if not the best defensive team all year. There's so many defensive pieces, so much defensive talent on that team. It's going to be hard to score on them on any given night. The Sixers, I think, did the best job, and they gave up 110 points to the Sixers. And like, that's great. Right. I thought that was like, that is their defensive identity. That's their identity as a team. It's like, how are we going to get stops, get out in transition, and score as much in transition as possible. And anything else outside of that, I think I was mostly looking for how this team is going to prioritize Scottie Barnes moving forward in the future, and how they're going to prioritize the younger players. When it comes to Scottie, they have clearly emphasized, hey, we're going to play this offensive system that curtails and tailors to you, because this, like, 0.5 offense isn't like an offensive system. It's just like an ideology to have about how you want to play. And it's like quick decisions, right? Make quick decisions with the ball. And there might not be a better player. No, okay, not a better player, but like Scottie Barnes is like in the upper echelon of players that can make very, very quick and good decisions. And it's just worked so well to his advantage. He's taken a leap defensively as well, which I think has been so special, Lauren. Like his weak side defense, him roaming around the perimeter, him roaming around the weak side as the shot blocker. I think it's been phenomenal to watch. And like this, people are going to be mad at this comparison, but I think realistically, Scottie Barnes, his idealized version, whatever they're trying to build him into, is like a more talented offensive player than Sabonis, but with the playmaking chops of Sabonis, who can potentially, get into the scoring and shooting department a little bit more. He's trying to expand his shot. If he can get that jumper to a point where it's consistent, he's a much more talented player offensively than Sabonis. Keep that in mind. Now, defensively, he's looking like he's going to be a much better player than Sabonis. Like, Sabonis isn't a very good defender, but so you're looking at a player like, who would be Sabonis with the defensive acumen that kind of reminds you of like Bam Adebayo, right? Bam
Yeah,
Adebayo
that's
is the type of player that comes, but Bam can't spread the floor. I think
yep,
that's something that they're emphasizing a lot with Scottie Barnes. I
yep,
think Bam is probably a bigger player. He plays the center position. Scottie is more of a power forward, small forward type.
yep,
So there's differences. I'm not trying to make an apples to apples comparison, but I'm saying in
absolutely.
terms of like the archetype of the type of player they're trying to mold him into with
Hmm.
this system reminds me of those types of guys. And that's like a huge compliment to him. Those guys are multiple time all-stars, multiple time all NBA players. Those are guys that like are stars in this league.
Yeah,
And Scottie Barnes has made his way into star status. I
yeah,
think this year we're really seeing him be more comfortable than he ever has. He looks
hmm,
so much more confident. I think he knows that the team is prioritizing him, and
yeah,
that probably makes him feel good. And, outside of everything else in the season, the expectations, Pascal, all that stuff, knowing that they are prioritizing Scottie Barnes and knowing that this is the guy moving forward and he is taking that leap, that's something you can hang your hat on forever.
hundred
So,
percent.
yeah, all good here, man. All good here
Yeah,
as long as Scottie is doing his thing, to be honest with you.
yeah, I think early on, it's sometimes when the season starts and you're like, oh, the players are going to shake the rust off, or players are they're gonna get their legs under them. The shooting numbers will come up, but if they can start on day one and you can see the day one leap from last year, and it's like they have hit the ground running, they're bumping off Giannis on drives, they're doing all these things to a higher level than you saw last year. It's a big deal, and so with someone like Scottie, who a lot of people have sort of had this hope that he would turn into what
Yeah.
it looks like he's headed towards, is a really really big deal, especially for Toronto. When you kind of look at last year and the questions of what does the future hold, what are the decisions, what are we going to do, and now it's sort of, I mean, I'm not saying all their questions are answered, but I do think that seeing this early glimpse of what Scottie Barnes is turning into is a huge deal for Toronto. So
Well,
it's fun to see, and I'm excited.
yeah, well, to your point, like it makes you more confident in the plan long term,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly. Good way to
if
put it.
they hired Darko Rajakovic in with the idea of development and like, hey,
Hmm.
let's get these guys better, right? The
Right,
reason they're playing Malachi Flynn 15 minutes off of the bench is because they're saying, hey, we got to find a way to get this guy better. Precious
right.
Achua is being empowered more often because they're like, hey, we got to figure out a way to get this guy better. They want to get these young guys to get to a point where they are maximized, whatever that maximized final version is. Scottie Barnes can be better than Sabonis. Scottie Barnes can be better than Bam Adebayo. I don't think that's even a question in terms of like his actual talent. But the fact that he is well on his way to doing something like that, that's what makes you confident in the plan. And yes, it's 5 games. Yes, it's 9 games if you count the preseason. But ultimately, I do feel more confident that this team, despite the Pascal stuff, despite the OG stuff, despite, where this team might be headed in the short term, in the long term, building around like a guy like Scottie Barnes should field you a pretty damn good team.